Welcome to the Foster Friendly Podcast, where we come together to make a difference in the lives of children in foster care and the families who care for them. Foster Friendly communities are part of a nationwide movement by America's Kids Belong that helps people from all walks of life take action and help kids and families thrive. You'll hear from former foster youth, foster and adoptive parents, social workers, faith and business leaders, and other experts on how to engage in meaningful ways. Our hosts Brian, Travis, and Courtney explore inspiring stories of everyday people making a difference in foster care where they live and work.
Hello and welcome to the Foster Friendly Podcast. I'm your host Brian Mavis with my exceptional co-host Courtney Williams, exceptional as a person and not just as a podcast host. And Courtney, today, speaking of exceptional, we have a great guest with us today, and she is going to be helping us focus on 4 healthy habits you need to shift as a foster or an adoptive parent. And Nicole, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm super excited. So my name is Nicole Barlow. I am a former foster parent. We fostered for several years, and then we ended up getting an adoptive placement of a sibling group of 5. And so we adopted our
Just a light
5
load.
kids.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Well, I mean, it's funny because we have fostered for a while, and so we kind of thought we were pros. I was already training foster parents when we took our adoptive placement, so I was like, this isn't a big deal, right? And I was wrong. It is a big deal, but it has been a beautiful blessing. So we have been on this road, on this journey for quite a while. And I train foster parents for a living and also work as a health and wellness coach for foster and adoptive parents.
And you're, if I'm correct, a TBRI practitioner. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes, a
Great.
TBRI practitioner, which kind of helps me, pull all of my things together to really help and support families.
Okay,
That's
so yeah, with that TBR, and for our listeners, I forget that we just assume they know what that is. What is a TBRI
Yeah,
practitioner?
TBRI is trust-based relational intervention. It's a child-centered approach of working with kids that have previous trauma history. And so a practitioner is somebody that is like a professional in TBRI that has been trained in TBRI that can, a lot of therapists will use it in their practices professionally, but for me, I use it to train other foster parents in trauma-informed practices.
Great, thank you for explaining that. And then when you say it's a child-focused approach, is there a quick way to give an example of what that means?
Yeah, it just means that you're taking the whole child into consideration and you're taking what's happening in their body, what's happening in their mind, what's happening with their emotions, what has happened in their past, in order to best meet their needs and to work with them relationally.
Okay, and then one more question before we start getting into more of the specifics, but just general. So you're a practitioner of TBRI, but you're also a health and wellness coach. Is that something that is complementary, distinct? Explain what you're doing there.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. The way that I got into that was my own journey. In As I was parenting kids with trauma, I was paying so much attention to my kids' needs that I was kind of neglecting myself and my own needs. And my health started to fail. My mental health started to fail. Relationally, I was struggling to show up for my kids, so I could know all the right things to do. I was trained in TBRI. I knew all the right practices. I desired to connect with my kids and be attached to my kids, but I was having trouble kind of showing up for them. And so then I started to focus on my own health to get well for myself. And when I was able to do that, I noticed that I was able to show up for my kids very differently. I was able to be patient and that kind of stuff. And I just thought every parent needs this. Like, I am training all of these parents in these trauma informed practices, right? And how to meet the needs of their kids. But what I was seeing is they knew those things, but they couldn't implement them, or they were very reluctant or resistant to putting those things in practice. And it's because their own needs weren't being met. And so when our own needs aren't met and we're living in our what we call survival mode, right? Then we're not able to focus on other people relationally. And so I started coaching foster and adoptive parents on wellness practices to implement for themselves so that they can implement these strategies for their kids.
Okay, so where TBRI is child focused, the health and wellness is parent focused.
Yeah, well, I will say it kind of is child focused. In that it's how I show up for my kid, right? In meeting the needs of my child, one of the most important strategies in TBRI is that I am regulated, that
Mm-hmm.
that I am that calm place for my kids to be. And I can't be that calm place if I'm not meeting my own needs. And so I think a lot of times when we think child focused, we think only child, but it's not only child. In being child focused, I have to prepare myself to show up for my child.
Mhm. Dr. John DeGarmo, who we've had on in the past, calls us compassion fatigue. And it's just such a great term to think about, like, because we do, we give so much and so much time and of our body, our mind, our spirit, and it's overwhelming. And so if we're not focusing on ourselves, like you're talking about, that compassion fatigue is going to kick in and we're not going to be able to have the compassion and the TBR responses that we want to have in our homes, like you
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
mentioned.
it's biological. I mean, what is happening in our brains and in our bodies as we're neglecting ourselves actually changes the way that we're able to respond and show up. Like, we can't. It's not that we don't want to. We can't. We're incapable at some point of showing up as patient and regulated for our kids.
Okay, so now we have this little background into this. Let's dive
Yeah.
into the topic for today. Is you have this passion. It's very clear. You have a passion for supporting foster and adoptive parents and get them to understand their own well-being so we can support the kids better, right? So as we're thinking about this, what are some very practical things that we can do or change as foster and adoptive parents? So like, let's start off the bat. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when we think about what we can do to care for ourselves?
Yeah, these are gonna be very basic, you guys, but the first thing is water. And a lot of it is the same strategies that we would put in place for our kids. And one of the reasons I love coaching foster and adoptive parents in wellness strategies is because they already know them. We're already putting them into practice for our kids. We just have to turn them around and to put them into practice for ourselves. So a lot of times, parents are going straight to the coffee, caffeine. How do I get myself going for the day? All the things. And we're forgetting about water. But mild, even really mild dehydration will send our body into fight or flight. And so we have to be conscious of making sure that we are getting enough water, at least half of our body weight in ounces in water every single day. And starting with water instead of coffee, like drink a cup of water before you have your coffee so that it gets that hydration started, so that we're not started off on the opposite foot. We're not going in the wrong direction from the beginning. And that is a very easy strategy for parents to implement. I mean, just carry around your water bottle, right? And just make sure that you're sipping on it all day. It is very doable for parents to implement. It's just something that we aren't intentional about most of the time.
I was hoping when you said water, you were going to say go to the Caribbean Sea and just
Relax.
Listen,
yeah,
that
relax.
can be
Yeah.
very regulating as well. That
Okay.
can be very regulating as well. But I do think that that brings up a good point in that I think a lot of times as we're talking about self-care strategies, people are thinking things like spa, beach, you know, brownies and pedicures, right? Like that kind of stuff. And that's not actually the definition of self-care. Self-care is caring for your body, caring for yourself well. So it may be a part of that, right? Again, the beach can be very regulating for our system, but at the same time, we need to be putting these basic practices into place as well.
Yeah, and it's almost noon, and I have had no water today, but I've had a couple of cups of coffee. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Guilty.
that is true of both of us.
hmm
Well, and just like water is regulating, coffee can really rev up our cortisol levels. The caffeine in coffee can up our cortisol levels, which none of us needs more stress, right?
hmm
Um, and so we have to be aware. In fact, like I have started drinking a coffee that's like it's not decaf because I can't go totally decaf, but it's like a third of the caffeine because it helps my cortisol levels not go sky high from the very beginning of the day.
Okay,
Mm.
so without this being a formal product placement endorsement,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what is that coffee?
So I actually use Purity coffee. Purity coffee tests for mold. Coffee is one of the most likely products that people are consuming on a daily basis that has mold in it, which can be very dysregulating to your body. It can add a bunch of stress. It can cause inflammation in your body. And so I started using Purity coffee, and I can tell a very big difference when
Interesting.
I do like a bunch of Starbucks or something like that. So yeah,
Okay,
it has been very interesting. But
all right.
Good to know.
they offer a pack that's like a third of the caffeine. So it's not decaf, but it's a little
Light
lower
calf.
in the
Great.
caffeine.
All
Yeah.
right. All
Yeah.
right. So first one is water. And what would be your second easy
Yeah,
tip?
so kind of along that same route of making sure that we're not dysregulating our bodies is food. A lot of
hmm
parents skip breakfast, they may skip lunch, they forget to eat until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they're starving and they're just grabbing whatever's in front of them. And we would never do that to our kids because we know they would be dysregulated if they didn't eat. And so we've got to see that in our systems too. I think a lot of times we see in our kids that they are prone to be dysregulated because of their trauma history, but we are also prone to be dysregulated because of the trauma that we're kind of experiencing and the stress that we're taking on every day, which is higher than the average person usually. And so we have to know that we are prone to that dysregulation too. So making sure that we're eating at regular intervals every 2 to 3 hours, making sure we're getting protein in there, and making sure that within that food, we're consuming mostly whole foods. Because just like the mold in the coffee, right, can cause inflammation and dysregulate our system, you know, foods that are processed and have a lot of sugar in them, seed oils, that kind of things can be dysregulating to our bodies and cause inflammation as well. We stress does not just come from the outside. Stress also comes from the inside and what
Mm,
we're putting into our bodies. And so if we're putting a bunch of junk like in our bodies, y'all, and I am a very picky eater. I like chicken nuggets and pizza, and that's kind of like my diet and french fries.
mhm.
Um, so I mean, I get it that that stuff it tastes good, it's easy to go to a lot of times, and as busy parents, we're grabbing that stuff because it's the easiest sometimes. But if it's causing more stress in our bodies, then it's causing us to be dysregulated in front of our kids.
Yeah. I heard Dr. Karen Purvis in person for the first time 15 years ago. And it was like these aha things, like big things that were really, like you're saying, these are such simple things to do. For our kids, like one of the big things was a protein snack every 2 to 3 hours. And it's so funny how I adopted that for my kids immediately 15
Yeah.
years ago.
Sure.
But only in the last year did I start adopting that for myself. And it's like, why has
I
it
know.
taken me so long to
Mm.
recognize like that protein, what it does for our bodies? So what are some of your go-to snacks that are like for parents to kind of keep on something healthy throughout the day?
Yeah, so I meal prep. I don't meal prep like everything, but I meal prep protein at the
Mm,
beginning of the week. So I'll throw a couple of chicken breasts into the crock pot. Or a lot of times on Monday nights, we'll do hamburgers and I'll do like a burger in a bowl or whatever, but I'll cook extra so that I have that extra protein on hand because protein's the hardest thing to grab, right? Like you have to, a lot of protein sources you have to actually prepare. And
hmm
so if I prepare those ahead of time, then I have them on hand to just, I can just grab some chicken and throw it on a salad or something very, very quickly. But also things like eggs, boiled eggs, keeping those things on hand. Those beef sticks, like they've got some pretty good like protein beef sticks. Or there's some pretty clean protein bars too. You just have to be really, really careful about those. Um, but there are some things that you can like that you can have on hand and have prepared. I think if you just think ahead to what your week's going to look like, what you need to have on hand for you, it can be great. I think deli turkey is another one that is always in our refrigerator.
Great. So really easy, and I love what kind of the philosophical summary statement of that stress comes not just from the outside but from the inside. So solutions are water and whole foods. So what would be your third shift you would
Yeah,
make?
and much like it would be for our kids, it's movement, making sure that we're getting movement. But here's where most foster and adoptive parents go wrong. They think movement, and so they sign up for crazy classes that are an hour long, like just kill you kind of classes, right? Give everything that you've got. And those types of environments can actually put a lot more stress on your body. We have to be very careful, especially parents that are living in a very high stress environment, have to be careful about how they're getting movement and that they're not putting too much on themselves. So, things like walking is great. Walking is my one non negotiable every single day. It has changed my mental health completely, completely. I am what they call an extroverted introvert. Um,
Me too. Yeah.
Yay! So I'm very outgoing, but quiet space is like where I recharge. So my walks are that. It's a time for me to kind of process my own thoughts. But it can be very regulating to your nervous system. That bilateral stimulation almost simulates like what they do in like an EMDR, where they do the back and forth on either side as people try to process trauma. It's not exactly the same thing, but it can help your nervous system regulate. It can help you process emotions. It can help bring your cortisol levels down. So I think that is great movement for foster and adoptive parents to make sure that they're getting in every single day. And then strength training, adding in strength training a couple of times a week. And I'm not talking like hour long, go as fast as you can, as hard as you can for an hour kind of sessions, but just something to start building some muscle because muscle will help us start to regulate some of that cortisol in our body.
So far you've mentioned water, food, and movement, exercise, and reminds me of a few years ago during the Oscars. Steve Martin was introducing Brad Pitt, and he said, "I would do anything to look like this guy, except eat right and exercise." And so,
Yes. Yes.
and so, yeah.
If only, huh?
So right now, it's like, oh gosh, yeah, the things you're telling us to do: drink water, eat healthy food, and move. You'd think
And
we would do
listen,
that, but
the last one is just as basic. It's just as basic, it's just rest.
oh
Mhm.
Like,
wow,
you need
uh
to
huh.
give your body rest, right? And here's the thing, we all know these things. We do. It's not like we're not coming up with some magical formula, right? It's very basic things. But I do think that foster and adoptive parents need to be intentional about the amount of stress that they're putting on their bodies because if you go to a lot of exercise, diet and exercise kind of environments in our culture, it's going to be eat less and work out more. And what we need to actually do is eat more and work out, but work out less. Because we're trying, the key for foster and adoptive parents is regulating their nervous systems, kind of managing that stress in their body. So we want to do all of those things, but in a way that doesn't put extra stress on our bodies. So it has to be very different than what the culture would kind of preach. So it is basic. It is basic things, but also some of those things, like when you take rest, it can be hard for foster and adoptive parents to incorporate rest into their day, into their rhythm of life, just because of everything they have going on. But it is
How do you do
crucial.
it? How do you
Well,
rest?
there's a couple of different ways that I rest. Number one, my kids are a little older and settled. And so, sleep is not really an issue here like it used to be when they were younger. So, sleeping at night, I have a very strict like bedtime routine. I start getting ready for bed about 7 or 8 o'clock at night most nights, and take time to wind down and at
WINE, wind down?
wind, yeah, not wine. That's not
Which,
helpful.
no,
Listen, I
what?
have learned that is not
WI.
helpful.
Okay, okay.
That does the opposite.
All
That
right.
will keep you up at night. That's when you wake up at the 3 a.m., like, can't sleep kinda thing.
All right, all right.
But yeah, I have a bedtime routine, so it kind of I am ready to sleep when it's time for me to go to sleep. I'm very intentional about making sure I get a lot of sleep every night, 7 to 8 hours at least. And but I think rest comes on another side too, in that we need time away to kind of breathe and kind of reevaluate. And I always say for parents to get 2 days away, because the first day you're just kind of decompressing, and the second day allows you an opportunity to like plan ahead. Like, what is going well? What needs to be shifted around? What needs to change? What can we do better? What tools can I implement for my kids, right? Like, really thinking forefront, and planning ahead for my kids. So my husband gives me 2 to 3 days, um, about once a quarter. And it gives me a chance to kind of recharge and kind of reevaluate how things are going, what we can do differently, what phase of life are my kids in. Because I think in foster care and adoption, we may think we have mastered trauma in our kids at one level, and then they hit another stage and everything shifts, everything changes, and we have to reevaluate sometimes how we're doing things.
Yeah, so true. So true. I just love all this advice because it is so practical and so real. And
Mm-hmm.
again, like you said, these are the things that we easily overlook when our days are
Mm-hmm.
busy, or
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to just forget about these things. And I also really, one thing I love that you mentioned was the whole more food, less working out, but less working out. Because I feel like in today's culture, the whole mommy culture is you deserve, you need this, you need this. And I tell women that I mentor all the time, like I see so many women spending hours a day at the gym. And for one, that's time away from their families that in my opinion is too much time. But also, it's just not realistic. For me, that's not realistic. And so if I set that expectation on myself, then I'm failing. And so I start something and then I fail. And I start and then I fail. And what you're saying, these are all very realistic things that we can do. All of us can really do when we set our mind to them.
Yeah, and like walking, you
Mm-hmm.
can do with your family. My kids love to go on walks with me. I like walking by myself because it gives me some headspace. But when I can't, there are times when I can't, when my kids go live with me, and they love that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't need a gym to do that, and you don't need a gym to exercise. I just do body weight exercises, and it only takes several minutes a day, and it makes a big difference, though.
Yeah, it does make a big difference in just everything. It makes a difference in your mental health, your physical health, and your ability to show up for your kids. I do think it is a challenge, though, for parents to kind of get over that hurdle and start putting some of these things in practice. It's been very interesting to me with my coaching clients. Like, the things, I mean, these are the strategies that I'm teaching them. It's not anything that they couldn't have come up with by themselves, but sometimes we do need that accountability. We need some encouragement. We need somebody kind of walking alongside of us to kind of steer us towards these things, to kind of teach us how to implement these things amongst the chaos in our world. And when people are experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue, right, their brains are just kind of shut down. Like it just is. And so we have a challenge really thinking critically, kind of coming up with ideas. That executive function part of the brain doesn't work as well when we're overstimulated and overstressed. So really thinking through, how do I implement these things on a regular basis is important.
And I would say just start. And if you don't hit half your body weight in ounces in water, at least drink a glass of water.
Yeah.
And Brian, it's not half the body weight in coffee. Switch it around, maybe.
Right. So yeah. I've
Maybe
already exceeded.
alternate throughout the day
Right.
or
Right.
something, you
Yeah.
know.
You can do that. I mean, something's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so, and then, you boil some hard-boiled eggs, prep for that. You don't have to join a gym,
No.
you can stand right where you are and, do 15 squats. And then, add an extra half hour to prepping for resting at nighttime. And so I love how, I love that something that is, that can make a big difference doesn't have to be complicated.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, I was floored about what a difference it made in my home and in my kids, because the temperature of our home is set by us,
Yeah.
the parents. And so if we're not in a good space, if we're not healthy physically, mentally, emotionally or whatever, then the temperature of our home is not going to be healing for our kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I, again, really appreciate the simplicity and practicality of it. And then I want our listeners to, again, not just remember those 4 things, but the philosophy behind it is that stress doesn't just come from the outside. It comes from the inside. So it's important to pay attention to what you're putting inside of you in your body. So, Nicole, this is a question we ask of all our guests. How would you finish this sentence? What kids in foster care really need is
Healthy, regulated parents.
I love that.
Yeah.
And man, that applies to all kids, and not just kids in foster care. Yes. And so, what a challenge for our listeners, and something that hopefully they would want to embrace. I mean, why would you resist that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I've never gone for a walk. I love walking as well, but I've never gone for a walk and regretted it, like ever, or even picked up the weights and regretted it.
Yeah,
all those
yeah.
things you said, they're all so good that our bodies tell us that, and we know that. And so, yeah, challenge accepted.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
just
how could
do it.
if people wanted to follow you or find out more about your coaching, if they're interested, like a foster parent that's saying, hey, I'm struggling in this area, I need some support, I need to recognize I need that support, I see it now, how could they follow you or find you?
Yep. So you can find me on Instagram at Foster Wellness Coach. And you can also find my website at NicoleTBarlow.com, or you can listen to my podcast at Foster Parent Well. I do a lot of episodes on, supporting parents and their wellness journey.
And the podcast that you said is Foster Parent Well. Okay, great. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your compassion and practical applications. I definitely feel like this is an episode where our listeners can immediately make an improvement in their life by just implement at least one of these today.
Yep. Yep.
So they can foster parent well. I love that name. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks for joining us.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, will you help us reach more people by subscribing, sharing the podcast with a friend, and leaving a 5-star review? If you've been inspired by what you've heard today and want to learn more of how you can make a difference for kids in foster care and the foster families where you live, visit americaskidsbelong.org. We depend on individual donors to fund our work. We'd be grateful if you would consider joining us as a monthly donor. Visit americaskidsbelong.org to make your tax-deductible donation. Thank you. Together, we can ensure a family for every child in foster care and a foster-friendly community to ensure every foster family feels loved and supported.